So just to give you guys a little bit of background about myself, I think there was a bio on the event, but basically my background is in finance. I graduated college a little further back now than I would care to actually count. So I worked for a couple of years in finance, and then after that I decided to take some time off. I did the BEINA program to study Arabic. Before that I didn't have a lot of Arabic education. I did about 1 year in school. 1 year in college, and then I went and did the BEINA program years later, and then after the BEINA program I had actually been planning to just go back to work. I ended up having the opportunity to stay for another year to the Ulam Seminary. Now, for those of you guys, who here has heard of the Ulam Seminary? Oh wow, everybody. So I don't need to introduce it. So you guys already know about Sheikh Nasser. You know, he's a classically paid scholar. He studied in Pakistan. Sorry, did you raise your hand?
No, sorry, I was like chewing a bug.
Okay.
My bad.
And so I had the opportunity to study with him, so that's basically, those are the sources of my knowledge. You know, in Islam it's very important to be able to state, you know, this is where my knowledge comes from. It's a very important part of our tradition, so I just want you guys to know those are my sources. In addition to Sheikh Abdul Nasser's just notes and lectures, I will be referencing the classical work Ulun and Athar, which basically translates to the springs of, oh gosh, Athar are like the remnants, like the heavy, so just scratch that from the recording. I don't know how to translate that particularly well. Okay, so, and like I said about the format of the class, I want this to be very interactive, so please if I say something that doesn't make sense to you, something that contradicts something that you've heard, you should go to Sheikh and more about it. No, but seriously, stop me, ask questions. Feel free to make comments if something really affects you. If you want to know more about a subject, please stop me and ask. And I do want to really try to make an effort to get to know where everybody's level is at. And I do ask you to respect, you know, there might be times where I go into too much detail or I'm repeating something, especially in the beginning, that you've already heard. And the reason I want to do that is because, first, there might be people here that don't know. And then on top of that, it can, even if you already know, sirah is such that it's a beautiful reminder every time. I mean, I'll do my best to make it. It is beautiful in itself, but I'll try to maintain that. And then we are planning to just do this chronologically. So inshallah, we'll start at the beginning. We'll start with a description of pre-Islamic Arabia, and then just go from there and see how long, inshallah. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I have no idea how long this class will go on for. So, before we start actually delving into the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I just want everyone in this class to sort of know a little bit more about sirah and the science of sirah. Sirah, the word in Arabic, literally refers to a path that you've taken, or a path that someone has taken. And so, in modern times, it's come to be used just to mean biography. So there's sirah of all kinds, but generally when you hear the word, you know, sirah, a sirah by itself, that's used to mean sirat al-nabawiyya, like basically the sirah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when we think about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it might not seem extraordinary to us because growing up Muslim, you hear a lot about it, but in one sense, more has been written about this man than any other person in history. So just think about that for a second. We know not only the details of, you know, when he was born, where he lived, where he traveled, you know, the battles he engaged in when he passed away, but you know the most intimate details of his personal lives, of his personal life, of his, you know, relationships with his wives, with his daughters, with his uncles, with his, basically, we have so many of his sayings recorded on a huge variety of topics. It's really incredible when you think about the wealth of knowledge we have about him. In addition to that, one caveat I do want to give you is that within the science of sirah, I mean, in Islam we have a lot of different sciences. For example, we have fiqh, we have like aqidah, which is the system of our beliefs. And when we use hadith or narrations in those sciences, we're a lot more strict about what we can use. And we're a lot more strict about, we must use authentic hadith from which to base narration, on which to base rulings in Islam. Sirah is a little bit different from that. There are a lot of narrations that are a little bit weaker that are accepted into the books of Sirah. So, I'll do my best to try and tell you when I know of something that is a little bit weaker. But honestly, without that, we wouldn't be able to piece it together enough to tell the story. So that's just something you should know, that is a part of the science of Sirah. And I also want to take a minute to talk about why do we study it and what are the benefits of it. Obviously Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being such a huge figure in Islam, it's very easy to view him as someone who's very distant or someone who is sort of like a very perfect person that we can't aspire to and can't relate to. But there's a hadith which appears in both Bukhari and Muslim, authentic hadith, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who says, "None of you becomes a believer until I am dearer to him than his children, his parents, and all of mankind." And then some narrations go on to say in his life and his wealth and maybe a few other things. And I want to ask you, how do we understand that? Like, how there is a difference between saying, I respect Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, obviously very important, God chose him, but to say I love him more than anyone else in the world, that's a very lofty sort of idea. Just to clarify one thing, when the hadith says none of you becomes a believer, it doesn't actually mean that if this is not the case, you are not Muslim. It's in the sense of, it's a type of negation which is referring to the perfection of your faith. So you have not perfected your faith, basically, until I'm dearer to you than basically everybody else in the world. But I want you, and anybody who's willing to share, if you can describe in a few words just how you might view Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like if you were to describe in a couple words, what would you say? Sadia, because I remember that name.
I guess I always view him as a role model, and like you said, sort of perfect person to aspire to be.
I just see him as a man of impact, someone who just, came and just changed the Arabian world. It was chaos, and just him coming in and just making it making everyone united. I think he was a very powerful person with a powerful message. And
pretty influential figure in history. Comparatively, you don't have religions that have made that much impact.
Sure.
And taken over that swath of land in that short time and unified it for that long. And still has an impact nowadays in terms of our Western versus Eastern culture.
Absolutely. People even start riots just because somebody is insults Rasulullah. I'm not saying that's right, but that is the amount of power even the name has. Anybody else in the back? Do I have to introduce ourselves, by the way? We introduced ourselves earlier.
My name's Marla. My name's Ganja.
my name's Saliha.
Saliha?
Hi, I'm Charmin.
Charmin, nice to meet you. Are you guys all UT students?
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys are here. So you were going to say?
I was gonna say when I think of him, I think of home, a sense of nostalgic, we haven't experienced it, but just a sense of comfort and knowing that somebody loves you so much, and they haven't even met you.
And that's honestly really beautiful. That's something I really found while studying at Fulham. Before that, it was sort of just, because this is one of the subjects we're studying, obviously you have a lot of respect for Rasulullah, but the more I read, the more I listened to Sheikh talk about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, honestly, I could hear the same story, and the 10th time, I would still tear up, because it's almost like the feeling of somebody you love that has sort of passed on, and you're waiting for that moment where you're able to see them again, because you just know that, that you're just waiting to meet this person that has, that loves you so much.
So you had brought up an interesting point about the love of Rasulullah and how worship, the ideal is to love him more than all those other things. And you brought up a point, but I don't know if we had a chance to discuss it, is if you're in the camp where you're struggling with that sort of concept of what it means to love someone like that, who you've never met, like how do we go about thinking about?
I mean, I think that that's a very good question. First of all, how do you go about getting to that point, or dealing with the fact that, let's face it, you would not think of Rasulullah before you thought about your Mawla, I think studying the sirah is a beautiful way to get closer to him, because you can respect someone you don't know, but you can't. Love is from knowledge. Love is from, I know this person. I have the ultimate belief in what this person would do. I know that if he was here right now, he would stand up for me and take my side and hear me out, and would basically stand for me. And I think that if you put pressure on yourself, like, like I'm supposed to love Rasulullah, but I don't, I'm a bad Muslim, that's absolutely the wrong way to go about it. Study the sirah and let it happen organically. It will. Honestly, that's the best answer I can give to that question. It's really, I would think that it's impossible to study the life of Rasulullah and come out on the other side, if there is another side, without completely falling in love with who this person was. Would you guys like to join the class, by the way? So you didn't. I do need your names though.
My name is Bedr.
What's that?
Bedr.
Bedr.
Yeah.
My name is Muhammad.
Atman.
Nice to meet you. guys UT students?
No, I'm an ACC student.
Okay. You guys too?
They're just
taking
English.
Okay.
English.
Well, nice to have you. Okay, so the one more point actually I wanted to make about the idea of loving Rasulullah is, like, for me personally, I can share with you guys, Islam appeals to me intellectually. Like, I get it. I get why I want to follow it. I am aware of Allah. Sometimes when I'm really able to focus in my salah, I'm like, okay, yes, I can almost feel like I'm in front of Allah. I'm respecting. I'm not just like, I'm aware of Him. I know my place in the world. But the thing that moves me to Islam is the idea of Rasulullah and his story and what I know that he did in his lifetime. Before we go on, and again, I do apologize, a lot of this class is going to be just introduction to the sirah and why we study it. Towards the end, we'll get into a little bit of the actual history. But I really want everyone to know, why is this subject so important in Islam? So, the position of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Islam, we know from the Quran, he's a messenger of Allah. Allah says it over and over and over. He says it in Yasin. Yasin, which some people think is actually a reference to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of his names. Hakim, innaka lamina al-mursalin ala siratin mustaqim. You are one. Truly, you are one of the ones that have been sent on a straight path. He says, "Litundira." I'll get to that actually in a second. In Surah Al-Fath, one of the few places where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually refers to Rasulullah by his name. That happens maybe 4 places in the Quran. Where he says Muhammad, Muhammadur Rasulullah. In case there's any doubt, Muhammad is the Rasul of Allah. In Surah Al-Munafiqun, the first ayah is إِذَا جَاءَكُمُ الْمُنَافِقُونَ قَالُوا نَشْهَدُ إِنَّكَ لَرَسُولُ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ إِنَّكَ لَرَسُولُهُ. When the Munafiqun come to you and they say, we swear you are the messenger of Allah, Allah says, I know that you are my messenger, and I swear that they are liars, basically. Yes, that they are liars. We know from the Quran that he was sent to us to be our teacher. Allah actually says in the Quran that we sent you, or we revealed the Quran to you so that you may teach people. And it's very interesting, because that you is not to the people. He specifically says, we sent the Quran to you so that you may teach the people. And so he's a necessary intermediary in our understanding of Islam. That's from Surah Shu'ara. He says, وَكَذَلِكَ أوحينا إليك. That cat is for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. قرآنا عربيا لتنذر القرى ومن حولها. And وتنذر يوم الجمع لا ريب فيه. And warn about the day of judgment that there is no doubt in. So we understand that he is our teacher and our role model. When we look at the Quran, if Allah was to drop a book in the middle of Saudi Arabia at that time, first of all, no one will be able to read it. But second of all, that is not how people change. You know, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, but one of the things that that Aisha, radiallahu ta'ala anha, the mother of the believers, said was that if the first things that had been revealed to us in the Quran were to stop drinking, no one would have accepted it. No one would have become Muslim. And what I want you to understand from that is that if we handed someone a book and said, just follow these rules, it would not have been able to have that just incredible change and influence that it had on those people. Rasulullah showed us through the process of revelation and in his dealings with people how to implement the Quran even in our own lives. You know, what to prioritize, what comes first, laying down the basics, and then being able to build upon them. So there's lessons not only in the Quran, but how the Quran came down and how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught it and implemented it with the people. He's a role model for us in how we treat other people. One of the most beautiful things about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was his character. You know, Allah says in Surah Al-Qalam, ما أنت بنعمة ربك بمجنون وإن لك لأجرا غير ممنون وإنك على خلق عظيم. Exactly. وإنك لعلى خلق عظيم. No doubt you are truly upon great character. And our teachers have actually noted that to use the phrase upon great character implies that character is like something like a mountain. And at the very peak of it is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's the absolute example of how to be a good person. And so we see him as a role model. We also see from him how to balance the different injunctions in the Quran, because there is a lot of talk, especially nowadays, about the fact that the Quran has ayat of peace, the Quran has ayat of violence. You know, the Quran talks about fighting, and the Quran talks about holding back. The Quran talks about being strict, and the Quran is also very loving. And at times it can be a little unclear where the balance lies, and that's why we were given a real life human model. We have 23 years of his life to study. And 23 years being the period that he was a prophet, to understand how those things are supposed to be balanced within us. His wife said about him, when asked to describe his character, that his character and his conduct was the living Quran. The next thing we have to understand about the position of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Islam, and the reason it's so important to know his life, is that the Quran commands us over and over to obey him. In Surah An-Nur, and actually in many places in the Quran, it says, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ وَمَنْ يَتَوَلَّ فَإِنَّهُ عَلَيْهِ مَا حُمِّلَ I will translate it because I'm sitting in front of all of you and now I'm forgetting the verse, but basically, obey Allah and obey the messenger. If you turn away, that's upon you. And there's nothing required of him except to deliver the message. But this phrase, especially "Ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul," occurs over and over and over. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also commands us to adhere to his sunnah. In his final khutbah in Hajj al-Wada, he said, I leave amongst you two things. If you hold fast to them, the person who holds fast to them will not go astray. And those are the Quran, and that is my sunnah, meaning my example. And we have to study that example in order to be able to hold fast to Islam. The fourth thing to know just about the position of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in our religion is that, and this is not obviously like a point of belief or anything, but even in our salah, when we say durud, like those salams that we send upon him reach him. That's actually one of the honors that Allah gave him, that even every time we say his name, we're sending salam upon him. And that is like no other human being has been honored in that way that he's constantly being mentioned, his slams are being sent upon him. We have to know that this is someone we're going to meet. In fact, on the Day of Judgment, which everyone is going to meet Allah. Everyone is going to stand on the Day of Judgment, and he is the person, inshallah, that will be standing behind. And we have to know that, like we know surely where we're going to be tomorrow. That we will meet him, we will, inshallah, stand behind him. And he is going to be the one that will intercede for us. That's also a part of our religion, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is going to be the person amongst all the prophets, the only one who will be allowed to intercede for his ummah on the Day of Judgment, and ask Allah to forgive his people. So, that obviously is the most important benefit of studying sirah. I do want to mention a few more. First, like basically I've said, this is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being the method through which Allah taught Islam, and is the best way for us to understand Islam, by studying his life. Like I've said as well, because the Quran commands us to obey him, and he advises us to adhere to his sunnah. That's something we have to be familiar with. 3, one of the reasons that we study the sirah is to be able to appreciate what this man was able to accomplish. You know, there's a Persian couplet, which I actually am not even going to try to quote at this point. But basically, the meaning of which is that the beauty of the rose is only apparent when you see it through the thorns, or you see it amongst the thorns. And so if you understand sort of the chaos of that time, and you understand the situation that he was sent down in, you have a much greater appreciation for the change he was able to bring to these people, and to the entire world, subhanAllah. It also gives a lot of context to his words. If we don't know anything about Rasulullah, we don't know his character, then when you read a hadith, or someone quotes you a hadith, and it says, oh, you know, your prophet said X, Y, and Z, you won't be able to contextualize those words and understand, you know, in what situation he may or may not have said them. Like we've said, he's obviously a major role model for us. It's so much easier to, rather than having sort of a list of rules in your mind, you know, Islam says don't do this, Islam says don't do this, you know, he's in one sense a source of motivation, and also a source of, like, you know, what would Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam do in this situation? And once you would develop even a basic understanding of his character, that is something a Muslim can always come back to, which is a much much easier and much more innate sort of reference for how to be a good person, than trying to find like a legal answer to every situation. This next reason is something that, if you look at the Quran, over and over, Allah quotes the disbelievers as saying, no, we were only following this religion because we found our fathers doing it. You know, and out of love for their fathers, out of respect for their fathers, they kept following, you know, whatever they were upon, even though they might have had a sense that it was wrong. But Allah, I feel like, it very beautifully gave us an alternative to that. You know, a person that we can love and use that love as a motivation to follow the religion. And the last thing I want to point out is that if we look at the sirah closely, what it really is it's the story of the growth of Islam in a non-Muslim society. And a lot of the problems early Muslims faced are not different from the problems that we face today. Obviously, they're at a different level, but we can draw a lot of insights for our current day from those stories and from that history. So it's very relevant and applicable to where we are now. And finally, it's fascinating. But the sirah is just one of my favorite subjects to study. So that is why we study sirah, because I am nowhere close to time. Oh, by the way, this class is not going on until 10 p.m. If anybody read the Facebook invite, not even close. Inshallah, we'll go on for another like 15, 20 minutes or so. I wasn't sure how much time it would take to get through introductions and all, so let's start out by a description of pre-Islamic Arabia. What it looked like, what the culture was, who the people were, and then inshallah, let's just set that stage. So, that area, if we understand Saudi Arabia, what's now Saudi Arabia, that area was then known as Hijaz, or at least the area where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam basically was sent is known as the Hijaz in the Arabian Peninsula. It's a very isolated location. It's accessible by sea from basically most of its coast. Therefore, it was available for trade, but the only land route to that area is through the Syrian desert in the north, which made it very, very hard to get to. So you have a group of people that are very, very isolated from the rest of the world. Now this has benefit. This is one of the reasons why the Arabic language of that time was so rich, because it did not have outside influences, and it continued to develop, and those people were actually very, very proud of their language and the nuances that it had. Now, who were the people that lived in this region? Does anybody know? Where did they come from?
Yemen?
Some of them came from Yemen, absolutely. Anybody else? So we have basically two groups of people when we talk about Arabs. We have the ancient Arabs, and those are the Arabs that the Quran references when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the people of like Ad and Thamud. Those people, by and large, perished. Now the next group, the other group, is the migrated Arabs. And those are also of two types. You have what we know as the pure Arabs, and those were Arabs that came from Yemen. And then you also have what we know as the Arabized Arabs. And those were Arabs that migrated from other places. Primarily, Ismail alayhi salam and his progeny are what are known as the Arabized Arabs. So these people came from other places, but they became Arab, basically. When we actually look at the word Arab, the root of it, hold on, this is 1 second. I'm going to double check my notes. I don't want to misspeak. There's a few interesting things to note about the word Arab. It means primarily for something to flow, and this we can understand as a reference to their language, which they, because they were so eloquent and because they prided themselves on their so highly on their language, was something that they considered to flow beautifully. Actually, the word that we use for non-Arab, can somebody tell me what it is? It's the word ajam. And that actually means to not be able to speak. So they refer to other people who are not Arab. Obviously they're able to speak, but because they feel like the quality of their language is just not the same, their eloquence is just at a completely different level, they refer to people, even now, the non-Arabs as ajam, and that's the root of that word, is not being able to speak. Another meaning that can be derived from Arab is to be happy, to be emotionally fulfilled. And this meaning is actually seen in the Quran as well, when it describes the people of Jannah. And from this, we can see that there's an element of happiness, fulfillment, actually even passion. When a river overflows, they use this word as well. And it's also used in that sense to describe chaos. And to a large extent, these meanings describe the nature of the Arab society. You know, they were very passionate people. At the same time, there was a lot of chaos. They were also considered the height of just eloquence. Because their language was so insulated, it was allowed to develop for so long on its own without outside influences. They just reached a very high, and they had a love and respect for poetry. The language was able to reach a very high level. Now, in terms of the political situation at that time, there was the Roman Empire, then there was the Persian Empire. Those were the major powers at that time, but because Arabia was so hard to get to, and because, honestly, it did not have a lot of attractive resources, by and large, these people were left alone. They were valued for trade because they were a convenient stopping point on trade routes. So they were able to engage in trade, and honestly, the vast majority of their business and their way to make a living, especially in Mecca, was through trade. So they had that benefit of being able to engage in trade, but they were not really sought after by any major powers. They did not try to make inroads or take over Saudi Arabia. I keep referring to it as Saudi Arabia. Take over the Hijaz, because it would have been impossible to rule and they wouldn't have gotten anything out of it. Now, in terms of religion, we know that Ismail alayhi salam obviously settled there with his family, so Islam was in that area. So what happened? How did we go from the Islam of Ismail alayhi salam to what we know of pre-Islamic Arabia, which was
not very Islamic.
not very Islamic? What else do we know about it? Pre-Islamic Arabia, just when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came down, what was the situation on the ground?
They would like kill the daughters.
Sure, that was something that they were notorious for doing, which is, burning their baby daughters at birth. What else?
Idol worship.
Idol worship. That's primarily what I'm getting at. Is idol worship. And so the story, some of the narrations tell us the story of a man named Amr bin Luhay. And basically, he went to Syria. Oh, so actually, no, I'll come back to it later. And there he encountered people for the first time who worshipped idols. And so he brought idols back to his people. And so he's narrated to be that first person who introduced idol worship back to Hijaz. And actually, some of the other narrations state that he was led by a jinn to a region where some idols were buried, and he dug them up. I'm just sharing this, so this is a very interesting story. Amr bin Luhay, he dug up these idols and he brought them back to Mecca. And the thing that's very interesting about this is that those idols had names, and they continue to be worshipped until the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the names of those idols are actually referenced in the Quran as the idols of the people of Nuh alayhi salam. Actually, they're mentioned in Surah Nuh, where Nuh is actually alayhi salam is quoting his people, saying لا تذرن آلهتكم ولا تذرن ودا ولا سواعا ولا يغوث ويعوق ونسرا. These 5 names were actually the names of these idols that he brought back. Please correct me at any point. Yeah. So, where were we? And so we understand that is basically the beginning of idol worship in the Hijaz. What was the nature of this worship? What was the impact on their culture? And what was sort of the nature of their religion? First, we have to understand that they were not a very religious people in the sense where they were devoted to their idols. It was more of a socio-political structure for them. Having idols in Mecca made Mecca a meeting point and like a major pilgrimage center for the rest of the Arabs. And so it gave them a lot of clout and a lot of power. A lot of people would come there, so it was very important for them to maintain that religion, but it was not such that they had very strict rules that they followed, or that they were personally necessarily very devoted to those idols. There's a story about a Sahaba, and I actually can't remember off the top of my head who it was. I think it was Umar ibn al-Khattab, about how he had an idol that he carried with him that he made out of dates, and one day he just got so hungry that he ended up eating that idol. But it was still very important for them to maintain that religion because it gave them a lot of clout over the rest of the Arabs. The interesting thing is that in addition to Mecca being the major center for idols, there were other cities around Mecca that all had their own sort of special idol and their own special little shrine to those idols. So they were in some sense sort of imitating that concept of having the idols and having people come see them. And even if we have the concept of they would do tawaf around the Kaaba in the worship of these idols. Now, the Quraysh and the people of the Hijaz never stopped worshiping Allah. They never denied the existence of Allah. They never said, these are the only gods. Even at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they would say, his father was named Abdullah, the slave of Allah. They had this concept of one supreme being, but they thought of the idols, or they spoke of them as second-tier gods or intermediaries with Allah. And there was a lot of benefit for them, obviously, socially and economically and politically in doing so. So is everybody following where we're at? Okay, good. Any questions so far? Good, that means I can keep going. Let's see, I don't want to get to, yes, please.
I had a question, just because I heard a little bit different, like historical context of like how idols became.
Okay.
And so I just want to know if you've heard of it. That because like the Kaaba was established well before, you know, in the time of Abraham. But I heard that people who couldn't make the journey to do like the Hajj or whatever it's called back then. So what they would do was their relatives or like their fathers or something would take back stones from the Kaaba and take it back to their homeland, and they would say just do the Hajj around the stone and it'll be just like you did it over there. And so they started doing this, and then generation after generation started worshiping the stones that were from the Kaaba. Have you heard of it?
I feel like that sounds vaguely familiar. It wasn't in what I used to study for this specific halqa. Sheikh Omer might be able to shed a little bit more light on the issue. But you know, there are a multitude of narrations about this subject. I'm offering one.
Okay.
But Sheikh, if you have any comments as to that.
You're fine.
Okay, well, you know, I hope that helps. So another thing to understand about basically the conditions in Hijaz before Rasulullah ﷺ was even born is that you had Arabs living obviously all around Saudi Arabia. You had Arabs living within other empires. So at the fringes of what we now know as Arabia, you had Arabs basically living under Persian rule. You had Arabs living under Roman rule. But those Arabs were not, because they were second-class citizens of a sort in those empires. And so the people, the Bedouins and the Quraysh of Mecca were considered in one sense higher class Arabs because they were free and they didn't have those external rulers. And then in addition, the people of Mecca were considered people of honor because they were custodians of the Kaaba. Even though, you know, polytheism had taken over the land, there was still a lot of respect for the Kaaba. It was still viewed as something sacred. The tawaf was still done there in various strange ways. But the people of that place were still very much looked up to as some of the most honorable of the Arabs. Now, one thing, actually let me ask you guys, when you think of that society, I mean, obviously you've already mentioned the burning of the baby girls and some of the terrible things we know, but what else do we know about them?
You were tradesmen?
They were tradesmen, yes, absolutely. You haven't introduced yourself. What's your name?
I'm Maria.
Maryam, nice to meet you. And in front of Maryam?
Arisha.
Arisha.
They're very loyal.
Loyal. And so the point I was actually hoping to make is that when we talk about those people, we talk about the period of Jahiliyyah, we mostly talk about the negatives of that society. And there were a lot of negatives, and definitely Revelation was sent to correct those negatives, but there were also some positive aspects of that society that, you know, Islam confirmed, and that helped those people become, you know, what we know as the best generation of people, at least the ones that accepted Islam. Now, some of those qualities were loyalty. What were some other of those qualities?
I think you were talking about language and poetry and
Absolutely.
oration.
Yeah, they're super eloquent. They're also extremely hospitable, and I would say even hospitable to a fault. And that's not why sometimes we see things, even in the sirah, that make us a little bit like uncomfortable. Like for example, when when the Muhajirin of Mecca moved to Medina, and Rasulullah ﷺ made pairs between them. They said, okay, one Ansar will be paired with one Muhajir. And I remember there was one story where a man says, okay, you have half of what I have. You can have my house, I have 2 wives, I will divorce one, you can have one. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, this is crazy. But it was in that culture to be hospitable to an extreme. And that obviously we can see that sometimes in a way it's beyond what we would consider okay. But it's still something that we can respect and appreciate about their culture. They were extremely, extremely I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. They believed in honor and justice. It was not always, it was basically a tribal society, which meant the word of the tribal ruler goes, you are basically bound by that. If you are doing well in society, if you are well off, if you are related to the leader, you might have a great life. You might enjoy a lot of rights. Even as a woman, you might have a lot of rights and power that women in other places in the world actually didn't enjoy. And a beautiful example of that is Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. She was somebody who had her own businesses. She was someone who's independently wealthy. She was someone who had a lot of say and control over her own life. She chose who she wanted to marry, and she chose to propose to him. Another example is Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan radiallahu ta'ala anha, because later she became Muslim. But in the beginning, she was a very, very staunch opponent of Islam. She was one of the primary instigators of the Battle of Uhud. She is the one who caused the death of the beloved uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But when you think about it, she had a lot of power in that society. She was able to have a major influence on world events because of the way that society was set up. Despite being a woman, she still had a lot of autonomy and a lot of power. Now, the flip side of this is that the people that were disadvantaged, you could say the minorities, the slaves, poorer people, they had no rights. So you have the society which, in some ways, is not that different from our society today, where the advantaged have it great. They are able to enjoy justice. They're able to sort of, have the benefits of these ideals of justice and loyalty and hospitality. But then you also have this very dark flip side of this society. Let's see, what else is there to know? Get on to this topic. So we're talking about hospitality.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about the positives.
The positives and negatives of Arabian society.
There's one thing I was thinking about. Well, first, when you had said that there's different gods in different cities, it just reminded me of how we think of football as a religion. We say that kind of as a joke today, but it's also kind of really true, where you have, that's the one place where everybody kind of goes, and it's sort of part of the culture. Right. Maybe not everybody's like a true believer, but it still brings in a lot of money. There was that parallel. And then the other thing that you had mentioned was their belief, and comparing it to nowadays. Like nowadays we have a lot of atheism and people not believing in a higher power, but in that society, whatever sort of milieu of divinity that they had, they believed in something above themselves. Right. And so I think, in some of the stories of, in idol worship, at least there's a belief that they are not the center of the universe, which is...
Well, and it's interesting, actually, if you choose to compare it to today, where there is a religion in place. Even though there is a lot of atheism, we can say that by and large we are a Christian country, or a country that's based on largely Judeo-Christian values. But there's not that same respect for religion and the rules and mandates of religion as we have in Islam. And you can actually see this in pre-Arabian society. For example, they have the 12 months in a year, and within the 12 months they had this concept of the sacred months, the months in which fighting is not allowed. But they played fast and loose with this. If one tribe was at war with another, they would say, okay, and I'll give you an example using just Gregorian months. It's November, we're chilling, we're fighting. Okay, November's about to end. We are about to hit December, which is a sacred month. But this war is not over. Actually, we're going to skip December this year, and the next month, right after November 30th, is going to be January, because January is cool. We can fight in January. We'll be done in a couple of weeks. War goes on until January. January is about to end. The war is still not over, but then February is a sacred month. They're like, we're going to skip February too. And now all of a sudden it's March. The war ends in March. They're like, okay, now we're going to have December, and now we're going to have February, and then we're going to go to April. Just because they wanted to show respect to this idea of sacredness and following the mandates of religion, but not to the extent that they were actually willing to change their behaviors. So this was sort of...
So do you mean that they would just say, this month is now November, so they would just keep on fighting?
Yes.
And then just nominally say, okay, well, and then they'd make up those months later.
Exactly. So it's going back to the idea of chaos. So we had a fair amount of that. I remember something very important that I wanted to mention, and it escaped me one more time, so I'm gonna drink water about it. Okay, it's not coming to me. Actually, I think this would be a great place to stop. Jazakallah khair for coming today. Does anybody else have questions? Yes.
I know it. So next week, what is the?
So next week, inshallah, we're going to talk about the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, their history, some of the interesting things of note about his great-grandfather, grandfather, father, the marriage of his parents, and inshallah leading up to his birth. So those are the topics I hope to cover in the next class. Jazakallah khair again for attending. I hope this was helpful. I hope that even if it's all things you already knew, it was a good reminder for you. And wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.